Hey everybody, another KTOD Deck Tech Chirrut 2.0. Really excited to get such positive feedback on the first Vigilance Chirrut video that I did a few weeks back. Excited that people really took to it, played it in locals, played it in other events, and just had so much positive energy. So shout out to everyone who kind of jumped in on that list and really appreciated the Deck Tech. So thank you to all the followers and KTOD fans out there. This is Chirrut 2.0. It's a little bit more of a traditional take on Chirrut. The last version I thought was somewhat innovative, where you're able to jam um, power one, defense four units on the first turn, and then play Luke's lightsabers and Jedi lightsabers on them and ride them to victory in sort of a unique take on how to play Star Wars Unlimited. This version's a bit more standard. You're taking your leader, you're taking your base, you're taking your powerful units, and you're playing a pretty fair game of Star Wars Unlimited until you get to the angle to sort of jump into the unfair nature of it. So similar to the last video, I'm going to take us through the turns and how I built the deck based upon the turns. So let's kind of jump right in. You'll see right off the bat that we've got our leader. Chirrut comes out on the fifth resource turn, which is on the early side, and doesn't leave the table. And we're going to talk a little bit about that on that turn when I get to that page. But that's a huge benefit right now, and it's especially huge based upon the current meta with Steadfast Battalion being such a big chunk of the meta and knocking off everyone's leader and sort of that game of like getting to that fifth resource, maybe Boba mirrors, where you want to sort of be the one that walks into it having um, having the lead, the initiative, and maybe being able to pin a leader back. Well, sure, it gets to not have to deal with that world, and we'll talk about that later. Tarkin Town, really powerful, takes an action. There's a side to maybe using a 30-point base, but the ability to do 3 damage and sort of get to your later turns, and maybe that actually sort of saves more than 5 damage, I think means that Tarkin Town is worth it. And it's a very powerful base. I think if ECL was not printed, we'd be talking about this base being on the more powerful end of things. All right, so let's jump into the early plays in this deck. So with the Vigilance Chirrut, you're playing R2D2, you're playing C3PO, you're playing Regional Governor. And then with the idea on turn two, you're going to jam a Jedi lightsaber or something big on them. This is a different deck. You're not doing that. You want to play an early action. These are your best options. Um, Thought long and hard about Regional Governor, but really went with the full 12 Rebel units. We'll have Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader, you'll see in a second, are in the deck. But it's really important to sort of understand you want to play something early. You don't just want to claim. You can't really afford to just go claim into turn three with Chirrut. You really do need to do something on the first turn. Sort of put a little bit of pressure on, force them to think about, oh, do I want to waylay your turn two play or something along those lines. That allows you to get to the later turns with a little bit more of a sort of Chirrut is now opened up to do more things. So these guys sort of take some of the pressure off of Chirrut because they could potentially um, cause some serious damage. So pretty standard. You want to obviously against Boba, you want to be leaning on the space side to dodge card like Super Laser Attack. But overall, you want to be jamming a unit and then just sort of getting to those next sequential turns. So on turn two, this is probably the biggest difference between the first two turns are the biggest difference between Vigilance Chirrut and now Aggression Chirrut. So on turn two, you're playing a much more traditional game plan. You can play Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader, which is buffing your turn one play, but you're not jamming your other upgrades. You're not jamming your Jedi lightsabers, your Luke's lightsabers right away. You don't have that shield protection from the blue base, so it's much riskier. Your units also don't have for defense, so that's much riskier. So you really want to just develop your board a little bit, maybe take something away from them. Open fire is a reasonable play. If you actually feel like you need to trade and you want to play a fleet lieutenant to claim the initiative and also just kill their turn one play, if their turn one play is something you think is going to get out of hand, that's a reasonable play. Just jamming a Yoda. Before it was like, Yoda's going to be the one to really take the ball and sort of, if your first plan failed, now Yoda's going to be your new plan. Well, that's not necessarily the play here. He's just an efficient unit um, that comes on the field and draws an extra card and kind of gets you to that next stage. So again, sort of comparing Vigilance versus Red. Vigilance, you were more of this combo deck that maybe wanted to get one of your turn one plays to say 7 or 8 power um, very fast. And this is more like, okay, I've got a few units. We're in the first turn. We're sort of holding serve here. I'm not falling too far behind. But I'm also not necessarily pulling that far ahead as well. All right, let's go to turn 3. So interesting play. So turn 3, similar to Vigilance Chirrut, you really want to remove an opponent's unit. Um, so if they've played, say, a Boba Fett, or if you're playing against Sabine and they've played an aggressive space unit, this is when you want to take that turn off to make sure that you get to your Chirrut turn without too much on their side of the field. So you want to be looking at their battlefield, um, having maybe 2, maybe 3 units on turn 3, but if they've got 4+ units out on their on their Boba turn or their big sort of turn for Sabine, you're going to fall behind. So takedown on a Sabine is obviously fantastic. Open fire and takedown, kill everything from Boba. Now Boba might be ramping, and that's another consideration, but you sort of have to live with that. Ideally, you haven't walked into a super laser attack, so if they're ramping with resupply, you're not falling behind on units because resupply is obviously not a unit. So you really want to use your events here to just be a little bit more selective. And you do have K2. You'll see him in the side. He's like, "What's happening here?" He's sad. Well, you can jam a K2. However, it's just most of the time you want to just trade. You want to trade a removal spell for a unit. If you jam a K2 and they're able to sort of attack into it and maybe bounce it with a waylay or something, you can just kind of fall behind. So I don't love jamming K2 on 4. Sometimes on turn 3 on 4 resource turn, but sometimes obviously that's what you do depending on your hand. All right, so big part of the deck tech, if you've been kind of fast forwarding your turn, this is really your key angle here. So talking about various board states, let's say they've dealt with your units. Maybe you've got 1 hanging around, but you're behind going into this turn. Well, Chirrut comes out. Flip turn, Chirrut. What that means is even if they do enough damage to get past his defense, he stays out to the end of the turn. So he is a force unit. And now you get to do some pretty insane things on this turn. And much like the Chirrut deck, which was doing 2 things on this turn, this deck is always doing 2 things, maybe doing 3 things on this turn. There are absolutely disgusting plays you can do on this turn. So thinking about the sort of very powerful mid-range and aggro decks in the meta right now are Sabine and Boba. We can talk about the control a little bit later on, but Sabine and Boba. So let's say, and they both play Steadfast Battalion for the most part now. So they have a Boba. They come out, they Steadfast Battalion your Chirrut. Let's say they walked into this turn a little bit ahead. Chirrut now has 7 damage. You can then force throw and target yourself and just straight up kill the Boba Fett. A little fast forward to some of the other cards in this deck. We have 3 copies of Luke and 3 copies of Redemption. So you can play force throw right away, kill their Boba, which is incredibly powerful against Boba. It's incredibly powerful against Sabine. It also combines, I didn't make a separate slide for this, but on your turn 3, you can do that with Yoda. So you can play Yoda in force throw. So if a Boba player went like resupply to get a Boba out earlier, or somehow you played a Sabine on turn 1 and they played in a super laser tech to get ahead, you have that angle as well to play Yoda and force throw, and that happens sometimes. Another thing that's important to note is that It Binds All Things is incredibly powerful against Steadfast Battalion because you can actually use it to kill their Steadfast Battalion. So let's sort of think about the sequencing here. Boba comes out, you bring out your Chirrut, they ECL Steadfast Battalion. You then force throw Boba, kill the Boba. At this point, they don't have too much else to really work through you, so they maybe attack with a space unit or jam something else. You play It Binds All Things to remove 3 of your damage from Chirrut. You could then kill the Steadfast Battalion, and now you've got a Chirrut that's going to live to the next turn, and you've killed their 2 big things, and you can still play. This is the really exciting thing: Luke's lightsaber. So I left the 2 copies of Luke's lightsaber in this list. A lot of the aggression shirts don't have it. I really like it as the ability to sort of walk into that other angle that Vigilance Chirrut has, where you can get those 8, 9 power units attacking, where it feels really oppressive. You don't put it on necessarily like a cheap unit, but you can really jam up your Chirrut and make him huge. Only 2 copies of the forces with me. That's because, again, oftentimes are doing 3 things on this turn. You can also go Force Throw and Jedi Lightsaber. That gets you to killing the Boba, and Chirrut would be then big enough to not kill, but live, and then just do 6 damage into their base, and then you're living into the next turn where you're feeling pretty secure, and you can sort of do all of this again. So this turn is just so incredibly powerful. It interacts with the meta and Steadfast Battalion metas in a very different way. You're not sort of falling victim to Steadfast Battalion as much. You're actually able to use Force Throw to your advantage. I think there's a world where you actually mulligan for Force Throw against Boba. I think it's that powerful. So I wouldn't necessarily mulligan for a 2-drop in this deck against Boba. I would mulligan for Force Throw with a free mulligan and 50 card decks. Um, I think it's worth it. I would keep some very powerful hands, especially hands with It Binds All Things and other cards, but and like a good curve. But I think though Force Throw is so incredibly powerful. Another interesting note about Force Throw is the way that people play against you. They're oftentimes not going to have an additional 2-drop. They're resourcing their 2-drops and stuff like that. So if you want to target your opponent, Force Throw is oftentimes going to do 3 damage. So if they've attacked with something like a leader or a very powerful unit and it's got 3 health left, you can Force Throw and target them, which is obviously a more powerful effect with the discard targeting them. But being able to do 7 or 8 damage out of nowhere, incredibly powerful. Jedi Lightsaber continues to be a incredibly powerful card in this deck too. It's really what takes us home oftentimes in this sort of second wave of the tempo up that you get from your turn forward chart. All right, so what happens after the Chirrut turn? Well, you've got sort of a few defensive cards. You've got Obi-Wan. K2 is this other angle where you're able to play him on this turn and sort of put a little more pressure on the opponent. And then you've got your 2 Lukes, your 3 Lukes, and your 3 Redemptions is this big Force Throw targets. One thing to note, if you're playing against Boba, feel free to just discard your own large unit with Force Throw. Make sure you do the full damage to Boba. Kill him in 1 card. Well, 2 cards, but kill him in 1 action. It's always worth it. You should always do that. You'll draw your other top end and you'll have your Chirrut out as well. So sacrifice is sort of the important thing to note here. You're willing to sacrifice these cards. Obi-Wan and K2 oftentimes hit the table and leave it pretty early. That's okay. You're getting to your stabilization. You've already got there. K2, one thing to note, you almost always want to use the discard ability. It's very powerful in combination with Force Throw. You're able to discard. If you're not targeting yourself with Force Throw to kill a Boba, but you're maybe playing against Sabine and you're just going to sort of take their hand away, or you're playing against Control more so, you're able to discard multiple cards from their hand in 1 turn if K2 dies, and then you also target them with Force Throw. If you ever draw 2 Force Throws, and then you can completely strip their hand, which we all know against Control decks is a really powerful strategy from other games. And then you do have, these cards can take the game over themselves. Redemption's a very powerful, aggressive card. It's a defensive card, but it's also an aggressive card. Luke, we all know how strong he is. Obi-Wan is going to put 2 shields on Chirrut, and you're able to sort of push your tempo towards victory. So that takes us to this 50. I think it's very strong. I think it's tournament ready, to be honest. I think you've got a great curve. You've got the ability to to do things like Fleet Lieutenant early on an A-wing, which are just sort of traditional solid things in Star Wars Unlimited. But you've also got Luke's lightsaber, Jedi lightsaber, Force throw. It binds all things. The Force is with me. Like just the Chirrut sort of powerful angle that's embedded in this deck as well. And then you've got reasonable removal. You've got takedown. You've got open fire. You've got Luke. Luke is an incredibly powerful card that oftentimes gets forgotten with in some of these different lists that you see, and he can take the game over as well. So I really like this list. I think the numbers make sense. You're able to draw cards. You're able to have card advantage. You're able to have tempo advantage, and you're able to attack that steadfast battalion turn in a very unique way. And if you're sick of sort of getting your leader pummeled by steadfast battalion and Boba coming out of that turn with two, really oppressive units in Steadfast Battalion and Boba itself, and then another, let's say a 3-cost Boba or a 7 Fleet Defender, or just all these various powerful cards, and you're just sick of getting beat up. Try this out. I think it really allows you to sort of take that play pattern and use it to your benefit. Let's talk a bit about the sideboard. The third K2 comes in every single time against control. Vanquishes are reasonable against just problematic units. It's just a solid removal spell. System Patrol Capt is going to come in every single time against Sabine or anything with aggressive space. Disabling Fang Fighter, if you look at lists and they've got Traitorous, you're going to play that. Also very good against the Mirror. You're able to kill lightsabers and various things like that. Kanan Jarrus is a card that I'm experimenting. I don't love him in the deck. He's not in the main. This very well could be a cheaper removal spell. You're bringing in the K2 anyway, and you've got the Patrolcraft, so 4 is a bit jammed up. So that's probably the most controversial card right now, the one I'm sort of trying different things out. So if you've got any ideas, hit up the chat of what sort of could replace that spot. But you do have Sabine in the deck, so the life gain is pretty powerful there. And he's just a powerful card. But I do think he gets sort of out-tempoed by the current meta, talking about a card like a Steadfast Battalion or something like that. But he's also a Force user, and there's synergies there with Force Throw as well. All right, biggest question marks with this deck. Make an opening very well could be in the deck for Keenan, very strong against 7 Fleet, and just sort of the life gains relevant and staying alive. I think the -2, the problem is the aggressive decks aren't playing a lot of 2 defense units. And then the other controversial thing I think is Tarkatown versus just a 30-point base. Vigilance, the card, oftentimes would be healing 5 in the other version, and then doing one of the other modes, oftentimes defeating something or putting a shield onto something. But healing 5 was one of the big things you were looking for. And I think a 30-point base with cards like Luke and Redemption, it really does push you to almost like, wow, we have 30 health, but we're now going to almost always hit our Redemption, which means we're going to be even higher health. And like, where does that sort of cap out at? So with the 30-point base, I think is a consideration. I think it's very close. Tarkin Town, the ability to knock off a unit, to me right now puts it ahead, but I could certainly see a world where the 30-point base is what plays. So I think this deck is tier 1. I think maybe it's like, if we were doing decimals, I think it's like tier 1.2. I do think that, Boba and Sabines and some of the control decks are still at the top of the food chain, but I think this can certainly compete. You're going to have competitive games. You have the Chirrut's ability to not leave the table, combined with it binds all things, is so incredibly powerful. To use his own damage against the opponent, to use his Force user ability with Force Throw, to be a powerful unit that you can put Jedi lightsabers on and Luke's lightsabers on and just continue to smash into them and take their base hit points down very quickly is powerful. And then your top end with Luke's and K2s and Redemptions is also very strong. And I do love the double discard, the K2 and the Force Throw against control. Iden was an incredibly difficult match with Vigilance because your whole plan was to put a bunch of upgrades on one unit, and they have Power of the Dark Side, and they have other removal spells, and this one is very different. You're able to curve out, play K2, play force throw, target them as a discard, and it's just a totally different game where they're oftentimes living off the top of your deck, and you've got the ability to curve out, and also you've got a bunch of 2-drop units that have aggressive stats on their own, so you can, on your turn, on your fourth resource, you could play two drops and have pretty good advantage there. Um, and you know, this if I was playing Aggression Chirrut against a control deck, I'm feeling pretty good about my plan. So that's a nice avenue for the aggression side of things. And I've got really um, amazing angle against Boba with Force Throw. And then against Sabine, I liked Vigilance a lot. I think against with the red, you've got angles, you've got removal, you've got early 2-drops along with Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader to trade something early, or not trade, to get on top of something early. So I think this has game against the sort of big three of Sabine, Boba, and Control. I think it's got a linear plan of damage. It's not sitting around doing nothing, waiting for your opponent to draw like a combo and like a hand deck where they're, got these really top end U-wing combinations. You're able to push through. And excited to hear what you guys think. I'll be interacting with the comments on YouTube. And yeah, give it a try. I think it's a really solid angle to attack the meta. All right, guys, till next time, I'm out.